Christmas dinner smelled like roast turkey and betrayal. My son Dylan stood up, wineglass in hand, his voice slicing through the festive chatter. "We've voted, Mom. You are no longer a member of our family. It's time for you to leave this house." The guests froze, forks suspended midair. Victoria, my daughter-in-law, smiled slightly, her red lips curved in satisfaction. I smiled back, reaching for the folder I'd placed beside my plate hours earlier. "Here's a parting gift for you, son," I said, my voice steadier than my heart. Dylan opened it, and his face drained of all color. He screamed. Everyone was watching, unaware that my revenge had just begun. They thought they had destroyed me, but they were wrong. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from." Let me take you back 3 months before that fateful Christmas dinner, when the first cracks began to show in what I thought was an unbreakable bond with my only son. Chechimunk. The first autumn chill had settled over Chicago, painting the oak trees in our yard brilliant shades of amber and gold. I stood in my kitchen, the one I'd designed with oversized windows to capture the morning light, and watched leaves drift to the ground. This house was my masterpiece. As an architect for over 30 years, I'd designed dozens of buildings, but this was different. James and I had sketched the blueprints at our kitchen table, arguing playfully about ceiling heights and window placements. We'd built it together, brick by stubborn brick. Now, 3 years after cancer stole him from me, I still felt James in every corner of this house. The kitchen island where he'd cooked Sunday pancakes. The study with the slightly crooked bookshelf he'd insisted on building himself. The master bathroom with 2 sinks, though I now used only one. The doorbell's chime interrupted my thoughts. Dylan and Victoria had arrived for Sunday dinner, a tradition I desperately maintained, hoping to bridge the growing distance between us. "Mom," Dylan said, wrapping me in a quick, perfunctory hug. At 38, he'd grown to look so much like his father, the same strong jawline, the same crinkles around his eyes when he smiled. But lately, those smiles had become rare. Victoria followed, her designer boots clicking on the hardwood floors. She air-kissed my cheek, the scent of her expensive perfume lingering long after she'd moved past me into the living room. "This place looks more outdated every time we visit," she said, running a manicured finger along the antique side table James and I had found at a flea market in Michigan. I bit my tongue, something I'd been doing more frequently around my daughter-in-law. "Dinner's almost ready. I made your favorite pot roast, Dylan." My son barely looked up from his phone. "Great, Mom." Dinner was a stilted affair. Victoria dominated the conversation, talking about the promotion she was hoping for at the marketing firm where she worked. Dylan nodded along, occasionally glancing at me as if remembering I was there. "How's the architectural consulting going?" Dylan finally asked, the first direct question he'd posed to me all evening. "It's going well. Johnson & Associates asked me to review plans for a new library downtown. It's part-time, but I enjoy keeping my hand in the—" "Mom!" Dylan interrupted, setting down his fork with a clatter that made me flinch. "We've been meaning to talk to you about something important." The sudden seriousness in his tone sent a chill through me. Victoria straightened in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "We think it's time you consider downsizing," Dylan continued. "This house is too big for one person. The maintenance alone must be overwhelming." "I manage just fine," I said. "It's it," noticing how Victoria and Dylan exchanged glances. "Besides, I designed this house. Every inch of it holds memories." Victoria sighed dramatically. "Barbara, memories don't keep the roof from leaking or the foundation from settling. This place needs major updates. The kitchen alone is straight out of the 1990s. "I like my kitchen," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "And the roof doesn't leak." Dylan leaned forward, his face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mom, We're worried about you. Living alone in this big house, it's not practical. You're not getting any younger." The words stung more than they should have. At 65, I was hardly decrepit. I still swam 40 laps 3 times a week at the community pool. I still took the stairs instead of the elevator. I still remembered every blueprint I'd ever drawn. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "We think you should sell the house," Victoria said, her voice suddenly gentle, as if speaking to a child. "We found a lovely retirement community in Oak Park. You'd have your own apartment, but with people around if you need help." "Help with what?" I felt my temper rising. "I don't need help. I'm perfectly capable of living independently." Dylan reached across the table, taking my hand in his. It felt foreign, this sudden affection. "Mom, we're just trying to look out for you. The money from the house sale would set you up comfortably." "And what about you two?" I asked, pulling my hand away. "What's your interest in me selling this house?" A flicker of something, guilt, annoyance, crossed Dylan's face. "We're thinking of starting a family soon. We've outgrown our condo, and honestly, it would be nice to have a proper house. Maybe this house." And there it was. They wanted my house, the house James and I had built with our savings, our dreams, our future in mind. The house that was meant to be our haven in retirement, filled with grandchildren and laughter. "I see." The pot roast turned to ash in my mouth. "And you expect me to just hand over the keys and shuffle off to some apartment?" "Mom, you're being dramatic," Dylan said, his voice hardening. "We're offering to help you transition to the next phase of your life." "The next phase." I repeated his words slowly. "You mean waiting to die in a retirement village while you two live in my home?" Victoria's smile disappeared. "Barbara, that's unfair. We're trying to help." I stood up, gathering their barely touched plates. "I think dinner's over. I'm not selling my house. Not now, not ever." Dylan pushed back his chair with enough force to make the water glasses tremble. "You're being selfish, Mom. This house is wasted on one person. We need the space more than you do." I turned away, unable to look at the stranger my son had become. "I think you should leave." The front door slammed minutes later, the sound echoing through the empty house. I sank into a kitchen chair, my hands shaking as I reached for my phone. I needed to talk to someone who would understand the hurt tearing through me. But who? Most of my friends had moved to warmer climates after retirement. James was gone. Dylan, my only child, had just revealed himself as a stranger. I'd never felt more alone. The following week passed in a blur of missed calls from Dylan, calls I chose not to answer. I threw myself into the library project, grateful for the distraction of work. But as Friday evening approached, I found myself dreading another weekend alone with my thoughts. The knock at my door came just as I was considering opening a bottle of wine. Through the peephole, I saw Sarah Jenkins, James's oldest friend from college and now my closest confidant. "I was in the neighborhood and thought you might want some company," she said, holding up a bottle of Merlot. "Though by the look in your face, maybe you need something stronger." I managed a weak smile, stepping aside to let her in. "Wine's perfect. I've had a hell of a week." Sarah made herself at home, grabbing glasses while I found a corkscrew. We settled in the living room, the space James and I had designed for entertaining now feeling cavernous with just 2 people. "Dylan called me," Sarah said, not one for preambles. "He's worried about you. Says you're refusing to answer his calls." I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the burgundy liquid cling to the sides. "Did he tell you why?" "Something about wanting you to consider downsizing and you taking it the wrong way." Sarah studied my face. "But I'm guessing there's more to it." I told her everything. The Sunday dinner ambush, the retirement village pamphlets Dylan had conveniently left on my coffee table, Victoria's thinly veiled comments about my outdated home. Sarah's expression darkened with each detail. They want your house? The house you and James designed together? Apparently it's wasted on just me. My voice cracked despite my best efforts. Barbara, Sarah said, setting down her glass, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. A knot formed in my stomach. What is it? I ran into Victoria at Whole Foods yesterday. She was on her phone, talking loudly enough that half the produce section could hear her. Sarah hesitated, as if weighing her words. She was talking to a realtor, Barbara, about your house. She was discussing potential renovations and asking about comparable sales in the neighborhood. The room seemed to tilt sideways, but I told them I'm not selling. I don't think they're planning to wait for your permission. Sarah leaned forward, her face grim. She said, and I'm quoting here, once we get the competency evaluation, we should be able to move quickly. Competency evaluation? The words didn't make sense, even as a chill settled in my bones. They think I'm incompetent. I think they're trying to build a case that you can't make decisions for yourself anymore. That way, Dylan could petition for guardianship. My wine glass trembled in my hand. My son wants to declare me incompetent so he can take my house? I don't know if it's Dylan or Victoria driving this, Sarah said gently. But either way, you need to protect yourself. I thought of the last 3 years since James died, how I'd struggled with grief but had ultimately found my footing. I'd continued working, maintained the house, stayed active in my professional associations. There wasn't a single reason anyone could possibly question my competence, unless they manufactured one. What should I do? I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. Sarah squared her shoulders, a determined glint in her eye. First, we document everything, every conversation, every text message, every voicemail. Second, you get a lawyer, not just any lawyer, a good one who specializes in elder law. Elder law, I repeated, the term grating on my ears. I'm only 65. Doesn't matter. These are the attorneys who deal with guardianship issues. Sarah squeezed my hand. And third, you need to be very, very careful around Dylan and Victoria. Don't give them any ammunition. I can't believe this is happening. The realization that my own son might be plotting against me was almost too much to bear. James would be heartbroken. Sarah's eyes softened. James would tell you to fight, and he'd be right there beside you, raising hell. For the first time since that disastrous Sunday dinner, I felt a flicker of resolve. James would fight, and so would I. The next morning, I called Robert Bobby Wilson, a retired lawyer who'd worked with me on several building projects over the years. He agreed to meet for coffee that afternoon, his gruff voice betraying concern when I mentioned it was urgent. Bobby was waiting at a corner table when I arrived at the cafe, his gray sweater as rumpled as his face. He'd been James's poker buddy for 20 years, and after retirement, he'd become something of a legal advisor for our friend group, though he insisted he was too old for courtrooms. "You look like hell, Barbara," he said by way of greeting. "What's going on?" I slid into the seat across from him and told him everything. The dinner, Sarah's discovery, my fears about Dylan and Victoria's plans. Bobby listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he let out a long, low whistle. "That's some serious stuff, Barb. But before you panic, let's think this through." He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, a habit from his courtroom days. "What evidence do you have that they're planning this guardianship move?" "Just what Sarah overheard at the grocery store," I admitted, "and their behavior at dinner." Bobby nodded, making a note. "Not enough for a preemptive legal strike, but definitely enough to start building your defenses. First thing, have you updated your will since James passed?" I nodded. About a year after, everything goes to Dylan. We need to change that, at least temporarily. It gives them too much financial incentive. Bobby tapped his pen against the table. Do you have other family? Siblings, nieces, nephews? My sister Margaret in Arizona. We're close, though we don't see each other often. And her 2 daughters, my nieces. Good. We'll redirect some assets their way for now. It's reversible later if things get straightened out with Dylan. He scribbled another note. Next, we need to establish your competence. When was your last physical? Cognitive assessment? I had a physical 6 months ago. All clear. No cognitive assessment, though. Get one. Call your doctor today. Tell them you want a full workup for the record. Then get a second opinion from another doctor. Bobby's legal mind was clearly in full gear. We need to create a paper trail showing you're sharp as a tack, which you are. The cafe buzzed around us, people laughing, chatting, living their normal lives while mine was imploding. This feels surreal, Bobby. My own son. Family can be the worst when money or property is involved, Bobby said, his voice gentling. I've seen it too many times, but we're not going to let them steamroll you. He hesitated. There's something else we should consider, Barb. What if you simply confronted Dylan? Called him out on what you know? I'd considered it, but something held me back. If he denies it, we've shown our hand, and if he admits it, I couldn't finish the sentence. Then you'll know exactly where you stand, Bobby completed my thought. Look, I know Dylan, known him since he was knee-high. This doesn't sound like him. It doesn't, I agreed, a lump forming in my throat. But Victoria, Bobby nodded knowingly. The daughter-in-law factor, tale as old as time. She's always been materialistic, but this is beyond that. It's predatory. I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug, seeking warmth. And Dylan just follows her lead now. Then we need to find out who's really driving this bus, Bobby said. And in the meantime, we protect your assets and document everything. As we parted ways outside the cafe, Bobby gave me a quick, fierce hug. You're not alone in this, Barb. James would haunt me for eternity if I didn't look out for you. For the first time in days, I felt a small smile tug at my lips. He would at that. I walked to my car with a new sense of purpose. If Dylan and Victoria wanted a fight, they'd get one. But it would be on my terms, not theirs. The next morning, I woke to 3 missed calls from Dylan and a text message asking if he could stop by that evening to clear the air. My instinct was to refuse, but Bobby's advice echoed in my mind. We needed to know who was driving this plan. I texted back a simple 7 p.m. works. The day crawled by as I prepared for his visit. I called my doctor and scheduled both a physical and a cognitive assessment, explaining I needed documentation for estate planning purposes. I called Amanda Collins, an attorney Bobby had recommended who specialized in elder law, and set up an appointment for the following week. Then I did something that felt both necessary and wrong. I set up my phone to record conversations. Bobby had been clear. Michigan was a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record conversations I was part of without informing the other person. At precisely 7:00 p.m., the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, checked that the recording app was running, and opened the door. Dylan stood on my porch, a conciliatory smile on his face. Thanks for seeing me, Mom. I brought your favorite. He held up a bag from Patelli's Bakery, chocolate eclairs, a peace offering. Come in, I said, stepping aside. I deliberately didn't take the bag, forcing him to carry it to the kitchen himself. We settled at the kitchen island, the pastries between us untouched. Dylan ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. Look, Mom, I want to apologize for Sunday. Victoria and I didn't handle that conversation well. I kept my expression neutral. Which part? The part where you called me selfish for wanting to stay in my own home, or the part where you implied I'm too old to live independently? Dylan winced. That's not what we meant. We're just concerned about you being alone in this big house. Maintenance, upkeep, safety. It's a lot for anyone. I've managed just fine for the past 3 years, I pointed out. I'm still working part-time. I'm active. I have friends. There's no reason for concern. Mom, you're 65. Things can change quickly at your age. His words were careful, rehearsed even. We just want to be prepared. There it was, the opening I needed. Prepared for what exactly? For me to suddenly become incapable of managing my own affairs? Dylan shifted uncomfortably. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? I leaned forward, holding his gaze. Because Sarah overheard Victoria talking about a competency evaluation. Care to explain that? The color drained from my son's face. Sarah was mistaken. Victoria wouldn't... Wouldn't what, Dylan? Wouldn't try to have me declared incompetent so you could take my house? My voice remained steady even as my heart raced. Because that's what it sounds like to me. Dylan stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen. Mom, you're blowing this out of proportion. Victoria was probably talking about work. She handles marketing for senior living facilities, remember? The lie was so transparent it almost made me laugh. So she was discussing my house's renovation potential and comparable sales in the neighborhood for a work project? That makes perfect sense. My son froze, caught in the fabrication. For a moment I glimpsed uncertainty in his eyes, as if he himself couldn't believe what he was involved in. Then his expression hardened. You've always been suspicious of Victoria, he said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. You've never given her a fair chance. I welcomed her into our family, I countered. I helped pay for your wedding. I've never said an unkind word about her, even when she's been dismissive of me. That's not true, Dylan snapped. You criticize everything about her clothes, her job, her opinions. I stared at my son, truly seeing him for perhaps the first time. This wasn't just Victoria's influence. This was who he had chosen to become. Dylan, I said quietly, I'm not selling my house. I'm not moving to a retirement community. And I'm certainly not going to sit by while you and Victoria try to declare me incompetent. He had the grace to look ashamed, but only briefly. You're being paranoid, Mom. Nobody's trying to do anything like that. We're just worried about you. I stood, signaling the end of our conversation. I think you should leave now. And please let Victoria know that I'm very competent. Competent enough to recognize a plot when I see one. Dylan left without another word, the chocolate eclairs forgotten on the counter. As soon as the front door closed behind him, I sank onto a kitchen stool, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. I stopped the recording on my phone, saving it with shaking fingers. My own son had lied to my face. He'd denied what I knew to be true, had tried to make me doubt myself. It was gaslighting, pure and simple. A strange calm settled over me as I stared out at the night through the kitchen windows James and I had argued over for weeks during the design process. He'd wanted them bigger. I'd worried about energy efficiency. We'd compromised, as we always did. There would be no compromise this time. This house was mine, my design, my labor, my memories, and I would fight with everything I had to protect it. The next few days passed in a blur of appointments. My doctor confirmed what I already knew. I was in excellent health, both physically and mentally. The cognitive assessment showed no signs of impairment. I had both reports sent directly to Amanda Collins, who was building what she called my competency dossier. Bobby introduced me to a financial advisor who helped me establish a trust for the house and my other assets. a legal structure that would make it much harder for anyone to challenge my control. But despite these precautions, a sense of unease followed me like a shadow. I found myself checking the locks twice before bed, jumping when the phone rang, scrutinizing every text message from Dylan for hidden meanings. One rainy afternoon, as I sat at my drafting table reviewing plans for the library project, I heard a key in the front door. My heart leaped to my throat. Only 2 people besides me had keys to my house, Dylan and Margaret, my sister who lived in Arizona. I moved quietly to the hallway, peeking around the corner. Victoria stood in my entryway, shaking raindrops from her umbrella. She hadn't seen me yet. I watched, frozen, as she moved confidently through my living room, pulling out her phone and beginning to take photos of the space. She opened closets, checked windows, made notes on her phone. She was assessing my house, measuring it, planning its future without me. White-hot anger surged through me, pushing aside my shock. "Can I help you with something, Victoria?" She whirled around, her face registering surprise before quickly composing itself into a smile. "Barbara, I didn't think you'd be home. Dylan asked me to drop off that casserole dish you left at our place." I glanced at her empty hands. "Where is it?" Victoria's smile faltered. "In the car. I was just looking around first." "With your measuring app open on your phone?" I stepped closer, noticing the application displayed on her screen. "That's an interesting way to return a dish." She slipped the phone into her pocket, her smile now brittle. "I was just curious about the layout. You know I've been taking that interior design course." "Of course." I folded my arms. "And does your course recommend entering people's homes without permission to take measurements?" Victoria's facade cracked, just for a moment, her eyes flashing with something close to hatred. "Dylan gave me the key. This will be our house soon enough." The baldness of the statement took my breath away. "Excuse me?" Realizing her mistake, Victoria backtracked. "I just meant that we'll be spending more time here, helping you out as you get older." "I don't need help," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "And this will never be your house." Victoria's perfectly painted lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see about that. Dylan's speaking with a lawyer this week about options for your care." "Get out of my house," I pointed to the door. "Now, and leave the key." For a moment I thought she might refuse. Then she shrugged, reaching into her purse to extract my house key. She placed it on the entryway table with deliberate slowness. "You know, Barbara, this would all be so much easier if you'd cooperate. Dylan's worried sick about you. Strange behavior, paranoia, forgetting conversations. These can be early signs of cognitive decline." I stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of mascara beneath her lower lashes. "I'm recording this conversation, Victoria. Would you like to repeat those false claims about my mental state for the record?" Her eyes widened slightly. She hadn't noticed the phone in my hand. Without another word, she grabbed her umbrella and left, the door closing with a decisive click behind her. I leaned against the wall, adrenaline draining away and leaving exhaustion in its wake. They were moving faster than I'd anticipated. Dylan was already consulting lawyers. Victoria was already measuring my home. I needed to accelerate my own plans. With trembling fingers, I called Bobby. "They're making their move," I said when he answered. "We need to act now." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he promised. "Don't do anything until I arrive." While waiting, I went through the house, checking each room for signs Victoria might have tampered with something. In my study, I noticed papers had been disturbed on my desk, financial statements I'd been reviewing. In the kitchen, several prescription bottles had been moved from their usual place in the cabinet. They were gathering evidence, creating a narrative of an elderly woman unable to manage her medications or finances. The realization sent ice through my veins. When Bobby arrived, his face grim as I showed him what I'd found, he shook his head in disgust. "This is elder abuse, Barbara. Plain and simple." "It's my son," I said, the words still impossible to comprehend. "My own child is doing this to me." Bobby's weathered face softened. "It's more likely Victoria driving this, but Dylan's complicit. Either way, we need to act decisively." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where James and I had sketched the blueprints for this house, where Dylan had done his homework as a teenager, where our family had shared countless meals and conversations. "First," Bobby said, opening his briefcase, "we need to change the locks. Today. Not just new keys. New locks with a security system that alerts your phone if anyone enters." I nodded, making a note to call a locksmith. "Second, we need to move up the trust paperwork. Amanda Collins can file it tomorrow if we get everything signed tonight." He pulled out a stack of documents. "This puts your house and assets into a trust that you control. Dylan won't be able to touch it, even if, by some miracle, he managed to get guardianship of you." "And third?" I asked, sensing there was more. Bobby's eyes were resolute. "Third, we go on the offensive. We send a cease and desist letter to both Dylan and Victoria, detailing their harassment and trespassing. We inform them that any further attempts to enter your home without permission will result in legal action." "A legal threat against my own son," I whispered, the words bitter on my tongue. "It's not what any parent wants," Bobby acknowledged, "but they forced your hand, Barb. They're trying to take everything from you. Your home, your independence, your dignity. You have to fight back." As I signed the stack of documents Bobby had brought, each signature felt like a step away from the life I'd known and toward an uncertain future where my only child was my adversary. "What if they escalate?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me. "What if they try to force the issue somehow?" Bobby closed his briefcase with a decisive click. "Then we'll be ready. Trust me, Barbara. They've picked a fight with the wrong woman." After he left, I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the home James and I had built together, the home where we'd raised our son. Grief and determination warred within me. In my mind, I could almost hear James's voice. "Don't let them take our dream, Barb. Fight for it." And I would, no matter what it cost me. The locksmith arrived within the hour, changing every lock and installing a security system with cameras covering all entrances. As night fell, I sat in my living room, watching the security feeds on my tablet, feeling like a stranger in my own home. My phone buzzed with a text from Dylan. "Mom, we need to talk. This has gone too far." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say, not until the Christmas dinner I was already planning in my mind. The dinner where everything would change. The dinner where I would take back my life. The manila folder felt heavy in my hands, though it contained only a few sheets of paper. I sat at my kitchen table at 2 a.m., the house silent except for the occasional creaking of the old oak beams that James had insisted on salvaging from a demolished barn in Wisconsin. The security system's tiny green light blinked reassuringly in the corner of the room. Sleep had become my enemy since Victoria's unauthorized tour of my home 3 days ago. Each night I'd wake with my heart pounding, imagining hands rifling through my belongings, measuring my rooms, evaluating my life as if I were already gone. So instead of fighting for sleep, I fought for information. The folder contained printouts of Dylan and Victoria's financial statements, documents I'd never imagined I would need to see. My hands trembled slightly as I spread them across the table, the moonlight streaming through the kitchen windows, illuminating a story of financial disaster. Credit card statements showed balances nearing $50,000 across 5 different cards. Most charges were for restaurants I couldn't afford, clothing brands I'd never heard of, and weekend getaways to places I'd only seen in magazines. A mortgage statement for their downtown condo showed 2 missed payments and a threatening letter from the bank. But what made my stomach clench was the statement for a property I didn't recognize. A vacation investment property at Lake Geneva purchased 18 months ago. They were 3 months behind on those payments, too, with a foreclosure notice dated just last week. "Oh, Dylan," I whispered to the empty kitchen. "What have you done?" The son I raised had been careful with money. He'd worked summer jobs through high school, saved for his first car, and graduated college with minimal debt thanks to the fund James and I had scrimped and saved to build. When had he become this person who spent money he didn't have on things he didn't need? The answer stared back at me from a credit card statement where Victoria had spent $3,500 on a handbag, more than my monthly pension payment. I remembered the Christmas 6 years ago when Dylan had first brought Victoria home. She'd surveyed our modest holiday decorations with barely disguised disappointment, later commenting to Dylan, just loud enough for me to overhear, that she'd expected something more elegant from an architect. James, always the peacemaker, had laughed it off. I'd bitten my tongue for my son's sake. If only I'd spoken up then. If only I'd warned Dylan about the path he was choosing. But wasn't that the eternal lament of parents? We watch our children make mistakes, knowing intervention will only push them further away. We hope the values we've instilled will eventually resurface. We wait for wisdom to win out. Now my waiting had led me here, to 2 a.m. investigations and security systems and legal maneuvers against my only child. A notification lit up my phone screen. Dylan trying to access the front door. The new security system had captured him standing on my porch at 1:47 a.m., key in hand, discovering the locks had been changed. The look of frustrated disbelief on his face sent a chill down my spine. What had he wanted in my house in the middle of the night? I gathered the financial documents, securing them in my safe. A wedding gift from James's parents that we'd always used for passports and birth certificates, never imagining it would one day hold evidence against our son. As dawn broke over Chicago, painting my kitchen in soft golden light, I made a decision. This wasn't just about protecting my home anymore. This was about saving my son from the disaster he and Victoria were creating, even if he hated me for it. "These are seriously concerning," Amanda Collins said, her glasses perched on the end of her nose as she reviewed copies of Dylan and Victoria's financial statements. At 45, Amanda was younger than most of Bobby's contacts, but her reputation in elder law was formidable. Her office, with its gleaming hardwood floors and abstract paintings, projected exactly the kind of confidence I needed. "They're underwater on 2 properties and maxed out on credit," she continued. "It explains their sudden interest in your house." I nodded, the confirmation bringing no satisfaction. "They're desperate. That makes them dangerous." Amanda looked up sharply. "Has there been any direct threat? Anything beyond what Victoria said during her unauthorized visit?" "Nothing direct," I admitted. "But Dylan tried to enter my house at 2 a.m. yesterday, and I've received 15 calls from him since changing the locks. I haven't answered." "Smart," Amanda said, making a note. "Keep that documentation trail clean. Let him leave voicemails if he wants to communicate." She flipped through the file I'd brought. "The trust paperwork is proceeding nicely. By next week, your house and major assets will be secured. And if they try to move forward with a competency evaluation?" Amanda's smile was sharp. "Then they'll be facing an uphill battle against your recent medical clearances, continued professional work, and extensive documentation of their financial motives." She leaned forward. "Barbara, I need to ask you something important. What's your endgame here?" The question caught me off guard. "My endgame?" "Yes. Are you looking to permanently cut ties with Dylan? Or is there a path back to reconciliation if he sees reason? The thought of never speaking to my son again sent a physical pain through my chest. Despite everything, he was still the baby I'd held in my arms, the boy who'd called for me after nightmares, the young man who'd made James and me so proud at his college graduation. I want my son back, I sassed, my voice barely above a whisper. But not like this. Not with Victoria controlling him. Not with lies between us. Amanda nodded, her expression softening. Then we build our strategy accordingly. Firm boundaries, legal protections, but always with a door left open. She closed my file. The Christmas dinner you mentioned, are you sure it's wise to confront them there? It's the perfect setting, I said, more confident than I felt. The entire family will be present. They won't be able to control the narrative or twist my words. Just be prepared for it to get ugly, Amanda warned. People backed into corners rarely respond graciously. As I drove home from Amanda's office, her words echoed in my mind. Was I prepared for things to get ugly? For the possibility that Dylan might never forgive me? That my intervention might permanently sever our relationship rather than save it? I pulled into my driveway, the house James and I had designed looming before me. Our dream, our legacy. Beyond its architectural merits, it held 30 years of memories. Dylan's height marks on the kitchen door frame, the den where James had taught him to play chess, the backyard where we'd celebrated birthdays and graduations. This wasn't just about property. It was about preserving what our family had been, and perhaps saving what it could still be. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Dylan again. This time I answered. Mom? He sounded surprised, as if he hadn't expected me to pick up. Finally! We need to talk about what's going on. I'm listening, I said, keeping my tone neutral as I remained in the car, recording the conversation as Bobby had advised. You changed the locks? Installed cameras? What's gotten into you? His voice pitched higher with each question. Victoria is hurt that you'd think she entered without permission. She told me she texted you before coming over. The lie was so blatant I almost laughed. Dylan, I have security footage of her entering with a key and photographing my home. There was no text. A pause. She must have forgotten to send it. Look, Mom, this paranoia isn't like you. It's exactly why we're concerned. Paranoia would be imagining things, Dylan. I have video evidence. I kept my voice steady. Just like I have evidence of your financial troubles. The foreclosure notice on the Lake Geneva property. The maxed out credit cards. Is that why you want my house? To solve your financial problems? Another longer pause. When he spoke again, his voice had a dangerous edge I'd never heard before. You've been spying on our finances? That's illegal, Mom. Is it illegal for a mother to be concerned about her son? To want to understand why he suddenly wants to ship her off to a retirement home and take her house? I fought to keep the hurt from my voice. What happened to you, Dylan? This isn't how we raised you. Oh, here it comes. The guilt trip. His bitter laugh cut through the phone. You and Dad and your perfect morals, your modest lifestyle. Do you know how embarrassing it was growing up with parents who could have afforded more but chose to live like we were middle class? The words stung more than I expected. We taught you the value of money, of earning what you have, of living within your means. Well, I've chosen differently, Dylan snapped. Victoria and I want more from life than what you settled for. And yes, we have debts, but that's normal these days. Everyone lives on credit. Not everyone misses mortgage payments and faces foreclosure, I pointed out. Not everyone tries to solve their problems by taking their mother's home. That's not... He stopped abruptly. Look, this conversation isn't productive. Victoria and I want to host Christmas this year. At our place. The whole family. It would mean a lot to us. The sudden change of subject gave me emotional whiplash. Christmas? You want to talk about Christmas now? It's only 6 weeks away, Mom. Margaret's already confirmed she's flying in with the girls. I thought we could start a new tradition. Victoria's an amazing hostess. I gripped the steering wheel, understanding dawning. They wanted to control the setting, to present me to the family in their territory, where they could shape perceptions and manage the narrative. Actually, I said, I've already started planning, here at the house, just like James would have wanted. Mom, I'll send out invitations this week. I hope you and Victoria can make it. I infused my voice with a sweetness I didn't feel. I'd hate for you to miss it. I ended the call before he could respond, my hand shaking slightly as I put down the phone. The first shot had been fired. Dylan now knew I was aware of their financial situation and that I had evidence of Victoria's trespassing. He also knew I wasn't going to quietly hand over my home. The ball was in their court now, and I needed to be prepared for their next move. The family albums were stored in the hallway closet, neatly organized by year in matching leather-bound books, a system James had insisted on, saying, "Memories shouldn't be kept in shoeboxes, Barb." I pulled out the album from 1989, the year Dylan was born, and carried it to the living room. Outside, rain pelted against the windows, the November sky a canvas of gray and muted white. Perfect weather for looking backward. The first photo showed James holding newborn Dylan, his expression a mixture of terror and adoration. I traced my finger over James's face, remembering how his hands had trembled when the nurse first placed our son in his arms. "You're going to break him," I teased. "Probably," James had admitted with a nervous laugh. "But look what we made, Barb. Look what we made." I turned the pages slowly, watching Dylan grow from infant to toddler to little boy. His first steps captured in a blurry photo. His 5th birthday, chocolate cake smeared across his grinning face. His first day of school, backpack nearly as big as he was, standing proudly on our front porch. When had that bright-eyed boy become the man who now saw me as an obstacle? What had I missed? What signs had I overlooked? I closed the album, unable to bear more memories. The past offered no answers, only the stark contrast between what had been and what now was. My phone chimed with a text message from Sarah. "Call me ASAP. Important." Sarah answered on the first ring. "Barbara, are you sitting down?" My stomach tightened. "What's happened?" "I was at Kingsley Realty dropping off flyers for the hospital fundraiser," Sarah said, her words tumbling out rapidly. "And I saw it. A brochure. For your house." "My house?" I repeated, not understanding. "What do you mean?" "Your house is listed in their coming soon portfolio. Not officially on the market yet, but they're quietly showing it to select clients. There's a glossy brochure with professional photos and everything. Interior shots, Barbara." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "That's not possible. I haven't listed my house." "I know," Sarah said grimly. "But someone has. The brochure says available early January. Inquire for details." I took a photo of it. My phone dinged with Sarah's incoming image. There it was. My living room, my kitchen, my garden, professionally photographed and presented in a high-end real estate brochure. The description read, "Architect-designed mid-century modern masterpiece, meticulously maintained, ready for modern updates." "The photos Victoria took," I whispered. She wasn't measuring. She was staging photos for this. "There's more," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. "The agent I spoke with, she didn't know I was your friend. mentioned that the current owner would be relocating to assisted living after the holidays. She said it was a sensitive situation involving family decisions. Daisy. The violation was so complete, so breathtaking that for a moment I couldn't speak. They weren't just planning to take my house, they were actively marketing it, creating a narrative about my future, proceeding as if my consent was a minor detail to be managed later. "Barbara, are you okay?" Sarah's concerned voice brought me back to the moment. "No," I said honestly, "I'm not, but I will be." I took a steadying breath. "Sarah, I need you to go back to that realtor. Tell them you're interested in the property. Get as much information as you can. Who listed it? What paperwork they have? Everything." "I'm on it," Sarah promised. "And Barbara, don't face this alone. I'm coming over tonight with dinner and a bottle of wine. No arguments." After we hung up, I sat motionless, staring at the photo of my home in the real estate brochure. The rage building inside me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Cold, precise, architectural in its structure. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. I called Amanda Collins immediately, forwarding her the photo of the brochure. Her sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know about the legal implications. "This is fraud," she said flatly. "They're advertising property they don't own and can't sell. What can we do?" "First, cease and desist letter to the realty company. Today. Then we accelerate everything. The trust, the will changes, all of it." Her voice took on a steely edge. "And Barbara, document everything. Every call, every text, every encounter. We're building a case not just for civil action, but potentially criminal charges." Criminal charges. Against my son. The thought made me physically ill. "Is there no other way?" I asked, hating the pleading note in my voice. Amanda's tone softened. "Let's start with the cease and desist. See how they respond. If they back off immediately, we can reassess." She paused. "But Barbara, you need to prepare yourself. This level of deception suggests they're not going to stop easily." After hanging up, I walked through my house, the house James and I had designed together, poring over blueprints late into the night, arguing over ceiling heights and window placements. The house where we'd raised our son, where we'd planned to grow old together before cancer had stolen James away. In the study, I opened the drawer where I kept my architectural tools, the ones I still used occasionally for small projects. The metal compass, the precise rulers, the drafting pencils. Tools of creation, of building. Now I would use them for a different kind of creation. A blueprint not for a house, but for justice. For protection. For survival. I pulled out a large sheet of drafting paper and began to sketch, not a floor plan, but a strategic map. In the center, I wrote home. Around it, I created boxes for each protective measure. Legal, financial, physical, emotional. From each box, I drew lines to specific actions. Trust establishment. Will modification. Security system. Family alliance building. This was what I knew. Planning, structure, creating something solid from mere ideas. As the rain continued to fall outside, I lost myself in the familiar process, finding comfort in the precision of my pencil against paper. This was no longer just about keeping my house. It was about reclaiming my power. By the time Sarah arrived with dinner, I had a comprehensive defense strategy mapped out. The architect in me had found her footing again, and I was ready to build something indestructible. "Barbara," Sarah's voice floated up from the first floor. "You have visitors." I glanced at my watch. Nearly noon. I'd been in my office since 7 a.m., finalizing details for the Christmas dinner invitations, each one handwritten with a personal note. Sarah had arrived earlier with coffee and pastries, insisting on staying to help after what she called the real estate bombshell. "Coming," I called back, setting aside my fountain pen. I wasn't expecting anyone, and after the events of the past week, unexpected visitors made me wary. I descended the stairs to find Ethan Parker standing awkwardly in my entryway, a bouquet of autumn flowers in his hands. Beside him stood his wife, Melissa, whom I'd met only a few times at Dylan's high school reunions. "Ethan!" I exclaimed, genuine pleasure warming my voice. Dylan and Ethan had been inseparable through childhood and high school, but had drifted apart during college. "What a wonderful surprise!" Ethan handed me the flowers, giving me a quick hug. "Mrs. Sanders, Barbara, sorry to drop by unannounced. We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd say hello." The formality in his tone suggested this wasn't merely a social call. I led them into the living room, where Sarah had already set out coffee cups and was disappearing into the kitchen, clearly giving us privacy. "It's been too long," I said, arranging the flowers in a vase. "How are the twins? Must be in middle school by now." "7th grade," Melissa confirmed with a proud smile. "Both on the swim team, like their dad was." An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only when Ethan cleared his throat. "Barbara, there's actually a reason we stopped by. Something's been bothering me, and I felt I needed to talk to you directly." I set the vase down, steeling myself. "What is it, Ethan?" He exchanged a glance with Melissa before continuing. "Dylan called me last week. We haven't really kept in touch much since college, so it was unusual. He wanted to talk about you." The knot in my stomach tightened. "What about me?" "He said you've been having some difficulties, memory problems, paranoia." Ethan's discomfort was palpable. "He mentioned you'd accused Victoria of breaking into your house, that you've been imagining financial conspiracies." I kept my face carefully neutral. "I see. The thing is," Ethan continued, "it didn't sound like you. Not the woman who helped me with my college application essays. Not the woman who remembers my kids' names and ages when we haven't spoken in years." He leaned forward. "So I thought I'd come see for myself." Tears pricked at my eyes, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of gratitude. This young man, who'd practically grown up in my house, trusted his own judgment enough to verify what he was being told. "Thank you, Ethan," I said simply. "You're right to question it." Melissa reached over and squeezed my hand. We knew something wasn't right. Dylan was asking Ethan to sign some kind of statement about your cognitive state. "For legal purposes," he said. The air seemed to leave the room. "A statement?" Ethan nodded grimly. "He wanted me to say I'd noticed changes in your behavior over the past year. Confusion, memory lapses, poor judgment. I told him I hadn't seen you enough to make that assessment, but he was persistent." "He's contacted other old friends too," Melissa added. "We heard from Diane Weber that Dylan called her as well." My mind raced. Dylan was building a case, gathering witnesses to testify to my supposed decline. It was methodical, calculated, and utterly heartbreaking. "I didn't sign anything," Ethan assured me. "And I won't." "But Barbara, what's really going on? Is there anything we can do?" I took a deep breath and told them everything. Dylan and Victoria's financial troubles, their attempt to pressure me into selling my house, Victoria's unauthorized entry, the real estate brochure Sarah had discovered. Ethan's face darkened with each detail. By the time I finished, he looked physically ill. "I can't believe Dylan would do this. He was my best friend. I was best man at his wedding, for God's sake." "People change," I said softly. "Or perhaps they reveal who they truly are when enough pressure is applied." Melissa leaned forward. "Barbara, we want to help. Ethan can provide a statement about your cognitive clarity, and if you need character witnesses, consider us at the top of your list." Their support brought the first real smile to my face in days. Thank you, both of you. That means more than you know. After they left, promising to stay in touch, Sarah emerged from the kitchen where she'd been giving us privacy. Good people, she said, nodding toward the door. You need more of those around you right now. I'm discovering who my real friends are, I agreed. But Sarah, this means Dylan is moving faster than we thought. He's actively building a case. Sarah's expression was grim. Then we need to work faster, too. She picked up one of the Christmas invitations I'd been writing. Starting with this dinner, it needs to be perfect, the setting for your counterattack. Perfect. The word echoed in my mind as I thought about the dinner I was planning. It did need to be perfect, not just the food or the decorations, but the timing, the evidence, the execution. I needed to reclaim the narrative Dylan and Victoria were creating about me. I needed to show everyone exactly who was competent and who wasn't. Dr. Wilson's office was reassuringly familiar. The same framed medical degree on the wall, the same slightly uncomfortable chair for patients, the same faint antiseptic smell. He'd been my physician for 15 years, had treated James through his cancer, had known our family through its best and worst moments, which made what I was about to discuss all the more difficult. Barbara, he said warmly, entering the examination room with a tablet in hand. Twice in 1 month? Everything okay? Your test results from last week were excellent. I forced a smile. This isn't about my health, Alan. At least not directly. He sat on his rolling stool, giving me his full attention. What's going on? I took a deep breath. Has my son contacted you recently? About me? Dr. Wilson's expression shifted subtly, a tightening around the eyes that confirmed my suspicions before he even spoke. He called the office last week, he admitted. Wanted to discuss some concerns about cognitive changes he'd observed. Dr. Wilson's gaze was direct. I told him I couldn't discuss a patient without their consent, but that he could bring you in for an evaluation if he was concerned. Did he ask you to fill out any forms or provide any kind of statement? Dr. Wilson hesitated. He emailed a form to my office, a standard cognitive assessment form, but one that's typically used in guardianship proceedings. He leaned forward. Barbara, what's happening? I explained the situation as succinctly as possible. Dylan and Victoria's financial motivations, their attempt to have me declared incompetent, their plan to sell my house. Dr. Wilson's face darkened. That's deeply disturbing. And no, I didn't complete any form. I wouldn't do that without examining you first, and certainly not without your knowledge. Relief washed over me. Thank you, Alan. But, he continued, this raises serious concerns. If Dylan is contacting multiple people seeking documentation of cognitive impairment that doesn't exist, that's a form of elder abuse. The term hit me like a physical blow. Elder abuse. Something that happened to vulnerable, isolated seniors. Not to me, a still-working architect with a sharp mind and good health. Except that was exactly what was happening. I'm taking legal steps, I assured him. I have an elder law attorney and have updated my estate planning, but I needed to know if Dylan had approached you. Dr. Wilson nodded, making a note in my file. I'm documenting this conversation, Barbara, and I'm going to add a flag to your medical records requiring direct patient consent for any information release. He looked up. If you'd like, I can also write a current cognitive assessment stating explicitly that you show no signs of impairment. That would be helpful, I said, grateful for his understanding. My attorney is building what she calls my competency dossier. As Dr. Wilson typed notes into my file, I gazed out the window at the gray November sky. Snow was forecast for the weekend, the first of the season. James had always loved the first snow, would insist on walking through the park regardless of the temperature, his face turned up to catch the flakes. "I miss your husband," Dr. Wilson said suddenly, as if reading my thoughts. "James was a good man. He'd be proud of how you're handling this." Would he? I wondered. Or would he be heartbroken to see what our son had become, what our family had devolved into? I hope so, was all I could manage. On the drive home, fat snowflakes began to fall, melting instantly on my windshield. The first snow of the season, right on schedule. I pulled over, unable to continue driving as tears blurred my vision. "I don't know what to do, James," I whispered to the empty car. "How do I fight our son without destroying him? Without destroying myself?" Only the soft patter of snowflakes against the car answered me. The key turned in my front door, but the lock didn't give. I tried again, jiggling the handle, before the realization hit me like a physical blow. The locks had been changed. Again, I stood on my own front porch, grocery bags heavy in my arms, as snow fell around me. The Christmas wreath I'd hung just that morning still adorned the door, a cruel contrast to the locked house behind it. Setting down the groceries, I pulled out my phone to call the locksmith who'd installed my security system. Before I could dial, a text message arrived from Dylan. "We need to talk, now." Fury rose in me, hot and clarifying. I called him immediately. "Did you change my locks?" I demanded when he answered. "Yes." No pretense, no denial. "You need help, Mom. Professional help." "By locking me out of my own home? In the snow? With groceries that will spoil?" My voice shook with rage. "How dare you?" "It's for your own safety," Dylan said, his tone maddeningly calm. "Victoria found your medications all over the counter yesterday. You're not taking them properly. You're becoming dangerous to yourself." Victoria was in my house? Again? The violation was becoming routine, yet no less infuriating. And I don't have medications scattered anywhere. I take 2 pills, one for blood pressure, one for cholesterol. They're in the cabinet where they belong. "Mom, please, we found them. We took photos." Dylan's voice took on a rehearsed quality. "We filed for emergency guardianship. The hearing is tomorrow. We didn't want to do this, but your behavior has left us no choice." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Emergency guardianship? Based on what? Based on your increasingly erratic behavior, the paranoia, the confusion about your medications, the security cameras you've installed, the accusations against Victoria. I steadied myself against the porch railing, mind racing. They were moving faster than Amanda had anticipated, using my own security measures as evidence against me. "Where am I supposed to go tonight, Dylan? It's snowing. You've locked me out of my home." A moment of hesitation. "We've booked you a room at Sunrise Assisted Living, just for evaluation. A car is on its way to pick you up." You've got to be kidding me. I looked down the street, half expecting to see an ambulance approaching. "I'm not going to any assisted living facility. I'm going into my house." "Mom," I ended the call and immediately dialed Amanda Collins. She answered on the second ring. "They've changed my locks," I said without preamble, "and filed for emergency guardianship. Hearing tomorrow, apparently." Amanda's sharp intake of breath was the only indication of her surprise. "Where are you now?" "Standing on my front porch with melting groceries," I said, a hysterical laugh threatening to escape. "They've booked me a room at Sunrise Assisted Living. Apparently a car is coming to collect me." "Don't go anywhere," Amanda said, her voice steely with determination. "I'm calling Judge Reyes right now. We'll get an emergency injunction. And Barbara, call the police. Report a break-in and unauthorized lock change. This is your property, not theirs." I ended the call and dialed 911, explaining the situation as calmly as I could to the dispatcher. As I waited for the police to arrive, I sat on my porch swing, the same swing where James and I had spent countless summer evenings watching the neighborhood children play. Snow continued to fall, dusting my shoulders and hair. The Christmas wreath on my door suddenly seemed like a mockery of the season's spirit. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men. What a joke. A police cruiser pulled up within 20 minutes, followed closely by Amanda's sleek Audi. The young officer approached cautiously, perhaps expecting the confused elderly woman Dylan had described. "Mrs. Sanders, I'm Officer Ramirez. You reported a break-in?" I stood, brushing snow from my coat. "My son and daughter-in-law changed the locks on my home without permission. I own this house. My name is on the deed." Amanda strode up the walk, briefcase in hand. "I'm Amanda Collins, Mrs. Sanders' attorney. I have copies of the deed and property records right here." Officer Ramirez looked between us, clearly assessing the situation. "Ma'am, is your son here? Can we speak with him?" "He's not here," I said. "He did this while I was out, then texted me to say he's filed for emergency guardianship and booked me into an assisted living facility." Amanda handed the officer a folder. "These are Mrs. Sanders' property documents. And this," she pulled out another document, "is a copy of her recent medical evaluation showing she is completely competent. This is elder abuse, officer." Officer Ramirez reviewed the documents, his young face serious. "I'll need to call this in, get guidance from my sergeant." While he returned to his cruiser to make the call, Amanda turned to me. "I spoke with Judge Reyes. He's furious. Emergency guardianship requires imminent danger, not vague claims about medication management. He's reviewing the petition now and will likely dismiss it, but we need to be in court tomorrow regardless." "Can they really just lock me out of my home?" I asked, still struggling to believe the reality of my situation. "No, they can't. That's breaking and entering, regardless of familial relationship." Amanda's expression was grim. "The question is how we want to handle this. We can press charges, have them arrested, or we can use this as leverage in tomorrow's hearing." Before I could respond, a black Lincoln Town car pulled up to the curb. A uniformed driver emerged, approaching the porch tentatively. "Mrs. Sanders, I'm here to take you to Sunrise Assisted Living." Amanda stepped forward, every inch the formidable attorney. "You can leave. Mrs. Sanders won't be requiring your services." The driver hesitated, glancing at his phone. "I was told to insist that she needs supervision." "What she needs," Amanda said coldly, "is for people to stop breaking the law. She's not going anywhere. If you continue to harass her, I'll add your employer to the lawsuit we're preparing." The driver retreated, clearly deciding this wasn't worth the trouble. Officer Ramirez returned from his cruiser. "My sergeant says this is a civil matter due to the family relationship, but since Mrs. Sanders is the legal property owner, we can assist with regaining entry. We'll need to call a locksmith." "Already on his way," Amanda said, holding up her phone. "Should be here in 15 minutes. As we waited, I sat on the porch swing, watching snow accumulate on the lawn James had been so proud of. The surreality of the situation washed over me. Locked out of my own home on a snowy evening, police and lawyers involved, a car sent to take me to an institution. All orchestrated by my only child. The locksmith arrived as promised, and within minutes I was back inside my home. Officer Ramirez offered to stay until I felt secure, but I assured him I would be fine. Amanda insisted on staying as well, helping me put away the groceries that had miraculously survived the cold. "They'll try something else," she warned as we worked. This level of desperation suggests they're running out of options financially. I nodded, arranging cans in my pantry with mechanical precision. "The hearing tomorrow. What should I expect?" "It will be straightforward. Judge Reyes is no nonsense and hates these kinds of frivolous emergency petitions. We have your medical evaluations, financial documentation of their motives, and now this lock-changing incident to present." Amanda closed the refrigerator door firmly. "Barbara, I need to ask, do you want to press criminal charges for breaking and entering?" The question hung in the air between us. Criminal charges against Dylan, my son, in handcuffs, a court date, possible jail time. "Not yet," I said finally. "Let's see what happens at the hearing tomorrow." "But Amanda," I met her gaze directly, "I want the trust finalized today, and I want to change my will, immediately." Amanda nodded, understanding the gravity of my decision. "I'll make the calls. We'll have the paperwork ready by morning." After she left, I stood in my kitchen, the house eerily quiet after the chaos of the evening. My security system blinked reassuringly in the corner, newly reset by the locksmith. I walked through each room, touching familiar objects, reassuring myself that this was still my home. In Dylan's old bedroom, now a guest room, I paused before the bookshelf still filled with his childhood favorites. Where the Wild Things Are, The Hobbit, science encyclopedias he'd pored over for hours. The boy who had loved those books was gone. In his place was a stranger willing to lock his mother out in the snow. I closed the door on the remnants of that boy and returned to my study. There I pulled out the invitation list for Christmas dinner, adding 2 names, Officer Ramirez and Judge Reyes. The stage was set. The players were in position. All that remained was the final act, a Christmas dinner where everything would change, where I would reclaim my life, my home, and perhaps in some way I couldn't yet imagine, my son. The morning of Christmas Eve dawned crisp and bright, sunlight glinting off fresh snow that blanketed Chicago like a promise of renewal. I stood at my kitchen window, watching cardinals flit between bare branches, their vibrant red a startling contrast against the white landscape. "Everything's ready," Sarah said, emerging from the dining room where we'd spent the morning setting the table with my best china, the wedding gift from James's parents that we'd used only for special occasions. "The place cards are set. The folder is at your seat." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. After weeks of preparation, legal maneuvers, and emotional turmoil, the day had finally arrived. Christmas dinner, the stage for my confrontation with Dylan and Victoria, the moment when truth would finally overtake deception. The guardianship hearing had gone exactly as Amanda predicted. Judge Reyes had dismissed Dylan's petition with barely concealed contempt, citing the suspicious timing and questionable evidence. When presented with documentation of my recent medical clearances and the lock-changing incident, he had leveled a stern warning at Dylan about elder abuse statutes. Dylan had avoided my gaze throughout the proceedings, while Victoria had glared daggers at me from across the courtroom. They'd left immediately after the ruling, refusing to acknowledge me or Amanda as we gathered our documents. That had been 3 weeks ago. Since then, silence. No calls, no texts, not even holiday cards. I'd begun to wonder if they would even attend the dinner, despite having RSVP'd through Margaret, my sister. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Sarah asked, breaking into my thoughts. "It's not too late to just have a quiet Christmas with people who actually care about you." I turned from the window, resolute. "This isn't just about exposing them, Sarah. It's about reclaiming my narrative. And maybe, just maybe, reaching whatever part of Dylan that still remembers how he was raised." Sarah squeezed my hand, her eyes full of concern. "Just remember, whatever happens today, you're not alone." The doorbell chimed at precisely 3 p.m., sending a jolt of adrenaline through me. Our first guests had arrived. Margaret swept in first, her Arizona tan a stark contrast to the Chicago winter outside. Behind her came my nieces, Eliza and Claire, now in their 20s and beautiful in ways that made my heart ache with the passage of time. "Barbara!" Margaret enveloped me in a fierce hug that smelled of the jasmine perfume she'd worn since college. "We've missed you so much." "Aunt Barb!" The girls took turns embracing me, their youthful energy filling the entryway with chatter and laughter. The doorbell continued to ring as more guests arrived. Bobby and his wife, Linda, Dr. Wilson and his husband, Greg, Ethan and Melissa Parker with their twin boys, even Officer Ramirez, who had responded to my lockout incident and whom I'd impulsively invited when I ran into him at the grocery store. Judge Reyes had politely declined, citing ethical concerns, but had sent a lovely poinsettia plant with a card expressing his wishes for a peaceful holiday. By 4 p.m., the house was filled with the warm hum of conversation and the rich aromas of roasting turkey and cinnamon. The only absence was glaring. Dylan and Victoria had yet to arrive. "Maybe they're not coming," Margaret murmured, joining me by the fireplace where I'd been anxiously checking my watch. "Would that be so bad?" Before I could answer, the doorbell rang one final time. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could make out 2 silhouettes. They had come. I opened the door to find Dylan and Victoria standing stiffly on my porch, both dressed impeccably. Dylan in a charcoal suit I'd never seen before, Victoria in a red cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Neither smiled. "Mom," Dylan said, his voice carefully neutral. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas," I replied, stepping aside to let them in. "I'm glad you could make it." Victoria's eyes darted around the entryway, noting the security camera discreetly mounted in the corner, her lips tightening almost imperceptibly. "Lovely decorations, Barbara. Very traditional." The slight emphasis on traditional was clearly meant as a critique, but I merely smiled. "Thank you, Victoria. James always loved a classic Christmas." Dylan's expression flickered at the mention of his father's name, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in weeks. Good. I needed him to remember, to feel. I led them into the living room where the other guests had gathered. A momentary hush fell as they entered, followed by a rush of artificially bright greetings. Everyone in the room knew about the guardianship hearing. News had traveled quickly through our small circle. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes, I announced, deliberately cheerful. "Please, everyone help yourselves to drinks." As the conversations resumed, I retreated to the kitchen, needing a moment to steady my nerves. Sarah followed, wordlessly handing me a glass of water. "They came," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. "Of course they did," I replied, sipping the water. They couldn't risk appearing unreasonable by skipping a family Christmas, not after the judge's warning about their behavior. Sarah squeezed my shoulder. "You're ready for this, Barbara. Remember that." Dinner was served precisely at 5 p.m., everyone finding their assigned seats around my antique oak dining table. I'd placed Dylan and Victoria directly across from me, where I could see their faces clearly. Margaret sat at my right, Sarah at my left, my strongest allies positioned close. The manila folder, the centerpiece of my plan, sat beside my plate, innocuous yet somehow drawing curious glances from around the table. Conversation flowed cautiously as we passed serving dishes around the table. My turkey was praised. Victoria's wine selection was complimented. The children's school achievements were discussed. On the surface, it was a normal family Christmas dinner, but the undercurrent of tension was unmistakable, like electricity before a storm. I waited until everyone had been served, until wine glasses had been refilled and the initial hunger satisfied. Then, just as the conversation began to lag, I gently tapped my glass with my fork. The table fell silent, all eyes turning to me. "I want to thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Christmas was always James's favorite holiday. He loved having the house full of people, full of laughter. I paused, allowing myself a moment to gather strength from the memory of my husband. This year has been challenging for me in ways I never anticipated. Dylan shifted in his seat, his gaze fixed on his plate. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her wine glass. Many of you know that there have been some difficult family matters recently, I continued. I've been reluctant to discuss them openly, but I've come to realize that silence only enables further harm. Mom, Dylan interrupted, his voice low but sharp. This isn't the time or place. Actually, I said, meeting his gaze directly, this is exactly the time and place, with family and friends who care about the truth. I picked up the manila folder, its weight somehow reassuring in my hands. 3 months ago, Dylan and Victoria suggested I should sell this house, the home James and I designed together, the home where we raised our son. When I refused, things escalated in ways I still find difficult to believe. Victoria leaned forward. Barbara, perhaps we could discuss this privately, after dinner. For everyone's comfort? Her attempt to derail me was transparent. I think we're past private discussions, Victoria, especially after you entered my home without permission to take photos for a real estate listing, or after you and Dylan changed my locks and tried to have me committed to an assisted living facility. Gasps echoed around the table. Margaret's hand found mine under the tablecloth, squeezing tightly. That's not what happened, Dylan protested, his face flushing. We were concerned for your safety, your health. You've been acting erratically. Erratically? I opened the folder, pulling out the first document. My recent medical and cognitive assessments. According to my doctor, who's sitting right here, I'm in excellent health with no cognitive impairment whatsoever. I slid the paper toward the center of the table where others could see it. Yet you contacted my physician requesting forms for a competency evaluation without my knowledge. Dr. Wilson nodded gravely when several guests looked his way for confirmation. You contacted Ethan, I continued, nodding toward my son's childhood friend, asking him to sign a statement saying he'd noticed cognitive decline in me, despite the fact he hadn't seen me in years. Ethan cleared his throat uncomfortably. It's true. I refuse to sign anything. Dylan's composure cracked visibly. This is ridiculous. We were trying to help. By listing my house with Kingsley Realty, I pulled out a copy of the brochure Sarah had discovered. A house you don't own, claiming I would be relocating to assisted living after the holidays? A decision you had no right to make? Victoria's porcelain mask slipped, her eyes darting around the table as if searching for allies and finding none. There's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I said firmly, extracting the next document, printouts of their financial statements. You and Dylan are deeply in debt. Your Lake Geneva property is in foreclosure. You have 5 maxed-out credit cards. You needed my house to solve your financial problems. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret stared at Dylan in open shock. Bobby nodded grimly, unsurprised by information he'd helped me uncover. You had no right to look at our private financial information, Victoria hissed, abandoning pretense entirely. That's illegal. Not when it's relevant to establishing motive for elder abuse, I replied calmly, which is exactly what your actions constitute according to Judge Reyes, who dismissed your guardianship petition and warned you about potential criminal charges. Dylan pushed his chair back abruptly, the legs scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. This is a witch hunt. You've turned everyone against us with half-truths and exaggerations. Half-truths? I pulled out my phone, tapping the screen to access the security footage. Like the half-truth of Victoria entering my home unauthorized to stage photos for a real estate listing, I turned the screen toward the table, showing crystal-clear footage of Victoria measuring my living room, taking photos, opening closets. Victoria's face drained of color. You were spying on us? I was protecting myself, I corrected. Just as I was when I recorded Dylan trying to gaslight me about your real estate activities, or when I documented the locksmith changing my locks after you locked me out of my own home in the snow. Officer Ramirez shifted in his seat, his professional demeanor momentarily giving way to a frown of disapproval directed at Dylan. You never cared about my welfare, I continued, my voice finally beginning to tremble with the emotion I'd been suppressing. This was always about money, about my house, about what you could take from me. Dylan stood suddenly, his napkin falling to the floor. This is insane. I'm not sitting here to be ambushed and slandered in front of— Sit down. The command came not from me but from Margaret, her voice like steel. You will sit down and listen to your mother, Dylan Sanders. After what you've put her through, listening is the very least you can do. To my amazement, Dylan sank back into his chair, looking for all the world like the chastened little boy he'd once been when caught misbehaving. I took a deep breath, reaching for the final document in my folder. This morning I finalized changes to my will and established an irrevocable trust for this house. Upon my death, hopefully many years from now, this property and half my assets will go to a foundation supporting young architects from disadvantaged backgrounds. Dylan's head snapped up, his expression a mixture of shock and fury. You're disinheriting me? The other half of my assets will be held in trust, I continued as if he hadn't spoken. If you demonstrate genuine change and rebuild our relationship over time, the trustees have discretion to release funds to you. But this house, I gestured to the beautiful space around us, will never be yours to sell. It will serve a purpose that honors your father's memory and my life's work. Victoria pushed back from the table, her face contorted with rage. You vindictive old woman, you think you've won? This isn't over. Actually, Victoria, it is. Bobby interjected, his lawyer's voice cutting through her anger. The trust is ironclad. I helped draft it myself. And should you attempt any further actions against Barbara, legal or otherwise, there's enough evidence here for criminal charges. Victoria turned to Dylan, clearly expecting him to defend them, to continue fighting. But my son sat motionless, staring at the table with an expression I couldn't quite read. The dining room fell silent except for the soft crackling of the fireplace in the adjacent living room. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, fat flakes drifting past the windows like fragments of a different world. I think, Margaret said quietly, that it might be best if Dylan and Victoria left now. No one disagreed. Victoria grabbed her purse, her movements jerky with suppressed fury. Let's go, Dylan. This family is toxic. But Dylan didn't move. He sat at the table, shoulders slumped, still staring at the wood grain as if it held answers to questions he hadn't yet formulated. Dylan, Victoria insisted, her voice sharpening. Now. Slowly, my son raised his head, but it wasn't Victoria he looked at. It was me. His eyes, so like James's, were filled with emotions I couldn't fully decipher. Shame, regret, anger, perhaps all three. I'm sorry, he said, the words so quiet I almost missed them. I don't expect you to believe that. I'm not sure I believe it myself, but I am sorry. Before I could respond, he stood and followed Victoria out of the dining room. The front door opened and closed with finality, and they were gone. The silence they left behind felt vast and uncertain. Then Eliza, my youngest niece, cleared her throat. Well, she said with forced brightness, who's ready for dessert? The tension broke like ice on a spring pond, relieved laughter rippling around the table. As conversations cautiously resumed, I excused myself and slipped away to the kitchen, needing a moment alone. I stood at the sink, staring out at the falling snow, trying to process the emotions coursing through me. Relief, yes. Vindication, certainly. but also a profound sadness that cut deeper than I'd anticipated. I'd won the battle, protected my home and my dignity, but I'd lost my son in the process. A gentle hand touched my shoulder. I turned to find Margaret standing beside me, her eyes filled with compassion. "You did what you had to do," she said simply. "Did I?" I asked, doubt suddenly flooding me. Maybe there was another way. Maybe if I'd tried harder to understand what drove them to this. "Barbara Sanders," Margaret interrupted firmly, "do not start questioning yourself now. They tried to declare you incompetent. They tried to steal your home. They locked you out in the snow. There was no misunderstanding here, just greed and entitlement." "He's still my son," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Margaret pulled me into a tight hug. "Yes, he is. And maybe someday he'll remember what that means. But today, you protected yourself when no one else would have. James would be proud." I nodded against her shoulder, allowing myself to draw strength from her certainty. We returned to the dining room together, where Sarah had already begun serving my apple pie, James's favorite, made from his mother's recipe. The evening continued, the atmosphere gradually warming as the drama receded. By the time guests began departing near midnight, hugs were warmer, laughter more genuine. The specter of confrontation faded into memory. Sarah was the last to leave, helping me load the dishwasher and wrap leftover turkey. "You were magnificent," she said, tying up a garbage bag. "Absolutely magnificent." "I don't feel magnificent," I admitted. "I feel hollow." Sarah's expression softened. "That's normal. You've been running on adrenaline and righteous anger for weeks. Now it's over, and there's a void where all that energy used to be." She squeezed my hand. "It will pass. You'll find your balance again." After she left, I moved through my quiet house, turning off lights, straightening chairs, restoring order. In the living room, I paused before the Christmas tree James and I had always decorated together. Since his death, I'd maintained the tradition alone, placing each ornament exactly where he would have wanted it. A small wrapped package caught my eye, one I hadn't noticed earlier amid the flurry of dinner preparations. The tag read simply "For Mom" in Dylan's handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it to find a small velvet box. Inside was a silver charm bracelet I recognized immediately. It had belonged to James's mother. I'd given it to Victoria on her birthday 3 years ago, a peace offering during a particularly strained period in our relationship. Attached to the bracelet was a note card. "Mom, this belongs with you. I'm sorry for everything. Dylan." I clutched the bracelet to my chest, tears finally flowing freely. It wasn't an elaborate apology. It didn't erase the betrayal or heal the wounds. But it was an acknowledgement, a small admission of wrongdoing, a tiny step toward whatever might come next. It was enough for Christmas night. Winter thawed into spring, buds appearing on the oak trees in my yard, crocuses pushing through the soil where James had planted them decades ago. I'd settled into a new routine, consulting work 3 days a week, swimming at the community center, dinner with Sarah or Margaret when she visited from Arizona. Dylan hadn't contacted me since Christmas, though Margaret reported he'd moved out of the condo he shared with Victoria and was staying temporarily with a college friend. Divorce proceedings had begun, initiated by him surprisingly. I'd resisted the urge to reach out, following Amanda's advice to give him space to process his own actions and their consequences. "If reconciliation is possible," she'd said, "it needs to come from him, on his terms, when he's truly ready." So I waited, focusing on rebuilding my life, reclaiming my sense of security and purpose. The trust for my house was finalized, my will updated, my financial affairs organized with a clarity I wished I'd established years ago. On a bright April morning, as I worked in my garden planting the tomato seedlings James had always insisted would taste better than anything from a store, my doorbell rang. I peeled off my gardening gloves, brushed soil from my knees, and made my way to the front door, expecting perhaps a package delivery or a neighbor. Dylan stood on my porch, thinner than at Christmas, his face more lined. He held a coffee cup in each hand, shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice uncertain. "I brought coffee. Dark roast, 1 sugar, splash of cream. You still take it that way?" I nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in my throat. "I was wondering," he continued, his words carefully measured, "if we could talk, really talk, about everything that happened, about what happens next." I studied my son's face, the face I'd loved since the moment the nurse had placed him in my arms 38 years ago. I saw regret there, and shame, but also something else. A determination, perhaps. A resolve to face what he had done and who he had become. "I'd like that," I said finally, stepping aside to let him in. As we sat in the kitchen where he'd grown up, steam rising from our coffee cups, spring sunlight streaming through the windows James and I had argued over, I felt something unfurl inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but its precursor. The possibility of understanding. The chance for healing. "I don't know where to begin," Dylan admitted, staring into his coffee, "except to say I'm sorry. More sorry than I've ever been for anything." "That's a good place to start," I said quietly. "The beginning is always the hardest part." Outside, birds sang in the oak trees, heralding new growth, new seasons, new possibilities. Whatever came next, reconciliation, estrangement, or something in between, I had reclaimed my power, my home, my story. And for now, that was enough. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.